Today we're going to be doing something that you've seen before, and that is winemaking. But what you haven't seen is us using something from this farm, and that's what I have here with us today. So today we're going to be making mulberry wine, and what you see here would be a bunch of frozen little tiny mulberries that we actually harvested from the farm here this year in 2021. So we've made wine with you guys before. In fact, I'm gonna go ahead and link our wine playlist here so it'll give you an idea of the different types of wines that we've made. This will be the first time, however, that we're making mulberry wine, and even better, it's actually the first time we're gonna be using fruit from the new farm to make that wine. So let's go ahead and get started on what we're gonna need in order to get this wine made today. The mulberries that I have here today are actually from our ever-bearing mulberry tree, hence the size. They're pretty small. Now we have a lot of them, and all of these were harvested here in the spring of 2021. Now, one of the things that we've learned with all of our fruit wines, including even grape wines, is we really prefer to freeze the fruit first. Now you'll notice that these fruit are not clumped together. And the reason why is we flash freeze these first, and then we freeze them completely inside a bag so they stay separate, just like this. Now these have been in the freezer for a couple of months, and now we're ready to use them. We've actually stored fruit for a year or two and still made fantastic wines out of them. So if you have some fruit at home and you're wanting to make wine from, it's very easy to just keep them frozen until you have enough to do that wine. We're gonna be making about 5 gallons of wine total, and what we're gonna need in order to do that is about 20 pounds of mulberries. So you're gonna want about 4 pounds of mulberries for every gallon of wine that you're looking to make. Before we get started on making the wine, I wanna talk a little bit about the reason why mulberries are such a fantastic fruit when it comes to living a healthy lifestyle. Berries have a lot of antioxidants in them, and one of those in particular is resveratrol. It's what gives it its dark purple color, and you'll notice that when you look at the liquid that comes from the mulberries, it's very similar to a dark red wine, and that color is really where you get those benefits. Now, I'm not gonna ascribe too much to that. People have talked about you being able to lose weight and all these other things, but one thing I know for sure is that it does help with oxidation in the body and, generally speaking, with immune health. And so that's one thing that we focus on here on the farm. Obviously, living a healthy lifestyle, part of that is consuming berries, and of course, what better way to consume berries than to turn it into wine. So obviously, frozen mulberries need to be defrosted before you can use them. And what I have right here is right at about 20 pounds of mulberries, and you'll see they're actually already starting to break down. Now, we are gonna need to mash these further, but looking down into there, I have some amazing looking juice. Before we get started, we're gonna definitely need to mash these. Now, it doesn't really matter what you use. We use a lot of different things, but I've always found that using my hands is the most effective way to get these mashed. For the most part, I think they're completely defrosted, but because this is nice and dark purple, which is exactly what we want, I need to put something on my hands so they don't turn purple. I should probably clarify one thing also when it comes to frozen fruit. Obviously, I'm able to mash these pretty easily with my hands. The reason why is one of the things that happens when a fruit is frozen is that the individual cell walls actually basically kind of pop or explode, and it's very easy to release the juice. Now, of course, it also reminds me a little bit of seeing those videos of people in Italy with their feet smashing grapes. This is probably a little more sanitary than that. But either way, it's the same concept. And then one other thing we've had people ask, can you just use a blender? And the answer is yes, you definitely can. However, it will make the process of racking and re-racking a bit more difficult. You'll probably wind up having to rack it an extra time or two, just because you're gonna have a whole lot more sediment, because very, very small pieces are created when you're chopping that up like that. So we've just found that it's a lot cleaner once you do that first racking if you mash it as opposed to blend these. So I think I'm just about done with this, and we can move on to the next step. Now what we need to do is we need to get to the point where we have about 5 to 6 gallons of liquid in our mulberries. Now, I don't know exactly how much liquid those have given off. I'm gonna estimate it's somewhere between half a gallon and a gallon, but I don't know for sure. So what I'm gonna do is, we know that one way or another, we're gonna definitely have to up the sugar content because we do like a nice strong wine. We prefer to drink a little bit of wine with dinner, and a nice strong wine, you don't need a lot. A little bit goes a long way. And of course, just from a frugality standpoint, having a stronger wine that you're not consuming as much of, it's gonna last that much longer. So what I have here is I have not really a simple syrup, but I have some liquid sugar. This is a 1-to-2 ratio of water to sugar. So 1 parts water to 2 parts sugar. In this case, we started out with 16 cups of sugar and added 8 cups of water in order to have this turn into liquid. Basically, you just bring it up to a boil, let it cool off completely, and it's ready to work with. Now, you don't need to do the liquid sugar, basically. In fact, we may not have enough of this based on the amount of berries and depending on how much sugar is in there. However, it's easier, at least in the beginning, for us to use the liquid version, and this is why. Here, I actually have about 3 gallons of water. Now, we're on a well here, so this is well water, so it's nice and clean. Obviously, if you don't have access to that, you probably would want to use some type of distilled water or some type of bottled water just to make sure you're not dealing with chlorine or anything like that. Definitely wouldn't want that in the wine. But I have about 3 gallons of water here. I know that I'm gonna have up to about a gallon or so of sugar based on the specific gravity that we're gonna try to hit for alcohol content. And I know that I have about half a gallon to a gallon here. So all told, I should have about 5 gallons of liquid, give or take. If I'm gonna err on either side, I'd rather have a little bit more than 5 gallons, mainly because of the carboys. So the vessels that we're gonna be using, we have a 3 gallon and a 5 gallon vessel. So I would rather have a little extra, so a little more than 5 gallons, so that I can top off after re-racking. What I need to do next is take this water that doesn't have any sugar content whatsoever and bump up the sugar content by adding the liquid sugar into this water before combining it with our mulberries. One of the things I'll be testing is the specific gravity, and that's where a hydrometer comes into play. I'm gonna shoot for here is about an 18% alcohol, which I believe is a 1.140 specific gravity reading with the sugar water before I add it to the mulberries, because I know that is sweeter than our mulberries are gonna be, but at least I'll have sweet water going into the mulberries because of course I may have to add some additional sugar based on the overall alcohol content or specific gravity that I wanna hit in the end. So now what we do is we take 1 cup at a time, add the sugar into the water until I hit that 1.140 reading on my hydrometer. Our specific gravity reading on what I have here is about 16% alcohol. I think I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. We're at just over 4 gallons, and I don't wanna really do too much more liquid than that because I'm already pushing it as far as how much our yeast is gonna be able to handle. Now, as far as amounts, one of the things that I always encourage everybody when you're doing winemaking, you can definitely use a recipe. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But as you get used to adding the different ingredients and making adjustments, you can definitely get used to doing this all really almost freehand, so to speak. Now, we do track a lot of our numbers, and when it comes to the amount of yeast we put in, some of the other ingredients, we are very specific with how much we put in. But when it comes to this step, it's really not as critical. You're really looking for that specific gravity reading so that you know what your potential alcohol is gonna be. What we're looking for is we want somewhere around 16% alcohol when it's all said and done, and that's essentially what we have here with the sugar water. Now what I'm gonna do is mix it in with the mulberries, make a few other adjustments so that we come back down to that 16% potential alcohol for the combined product. It didn't take too much more once we had those combined. The more I thought about it, I think we need to be careful. We only have 1 packet of yeast, and I want to make sure that it's going to be able to do its job as far as consuming all the sugar. Right now, my specific gravity reading is 1.120. That's about a 16% potential alcohol, which is plenty. That puts it solidly in the dessert wine category, which is exactly what we want. But I just want you guys to take a look at just how beautiful, dark, purple red this color is. You know, that dark coloration is exactly where you get your antioxidants from. That's really what you want to see. Really looking forward to trying this wine. Of course, that's not today. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and get this put back into the bucket, and we'll show you the next step before we set this aside for about 24 hours. Next step is going to be adding some acid to the wine. Now, if we were using grapes are nature's perfect wine-making fruit, and you wouldn't need to worry about the acid content. Because we're using mulberries, while they are fairly acidic, we know that the acid is not going to be quite high enough. Now, generally speaking, for a mulberry wine, for each gallon, you're going to want to have about a teaspoon of acid blend. Now, you can test it. The challenge with the testing strips with this particular type of wine is it's very, very dark, and you're going to have a hard time seeing the results on an acid strip. So what we're going to do is we know we have somewhere between 5 and 6 gallons of wine. So we're going to go ahead and add 7 teaspoons of the acid blend just to make sure our acid content is good. One of the reasons why you want to make sure the acid content is high, part of that is storage, and you want to make sure that you're not going to have any issues with mold or anything like that. And the acid, that high acid content, helps you with that. So you definitely want to make sure you're adding the acid, again, about 1 teaspoon per gallon of the wine. Last step for today is going to be disinfectants. What you have with mulberries, or any fruit for that matter, is there's yeast in here. Some natural yeast will occur, and what I don't want is I don't want that natural yeast to get in the way of the winemaking yeast that we're going to use, which I know will sustain that high alcohol content and survive it. So I want to make sure we're killing off any natural yeasts in here, and then any bacteria, because obviously you can see this is out in the open, and I want to make sure that we're killing that off as well. So I'm going to be using Camden tablets, a very common winemaking ingredient. What you want to do is use 1 tablet for every gallon of material. I have just under 7 gallons. In this case, I always err on the side of caution and make sure that we're killing everything off. So I'm going to be adding 7 Camden tablets just to make sure we get all of this completely disinfected. Now, the easiest thing to do with these tablets is to take 2 tablespoons, so metal spoons, and then basically just mash it between the 2 spoons so that it turns into a powder, and then you'll sprinkle that in. We are gonna let this off gas for about 24 hours. And one of the reasons why I like this container is this lid is actually very loose. And the Camden tablets are gonna off gas, and you wanna let those sulfites basically off gas and get out of the liquid. So if you don't have a loose top like this, you can just put some type of towel or something over the top to make sure you don't have any bugs or creepy crawlers get in there. But you do want to make sure that the lid itself is nice and loose and is going to allow that off-gassing to occur. Okay, so it is about noon here today. We are going to give this about 24 hours. So we're going to skip ahead to tomorrow, and we'll show you what is next. We are 24 hours later, and it is time to move to our next step. I have 3 ingredients in front of me here that are gonna actually get the wine started here today. The first thing we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be utilizing a pectic enzyme. One of the things that regular fruits have in them that grapes don't when it comes to wine is pectin. And that can create a haze in the wine. We've seen that in some of our first wines. We still see it from time to time, because it's always kind of hard to judge that really all that well. So we want to get this into the must now, and the reason why is, in addition to it keeping the wine from having much of a haze to it, it also will help to increase yields out of the fruit. We want to squeeze as much juice as we can, and the pectic enzyme actually helps to do that. Generally speaking, you want to use about 1/2 teaspoon per gallon of wine. I'm assuming I have somewhere between 5 and 6 gallons of actual wine that we'll be able to extract from this particular batch. So I'm gonna err on the side of caution and use the higher amount of the 2 This is gonna be based on 6 gallons of wine, and this is 3 teaspoons of pectic enzyme. Next ingredient going into the must is going to be some yeast nutrient. Now, this generally calls for about 1 to 1.5 teaspoons per gallon of wine. Again, I'm gonna base this off of 6 gallons of finished wine. So I have 9 teaspoons of yeast nutrient. Now the yeast nutrient, I wouldn't necessarily say you have to do it. I always err on the side of caution, especially because my packet of yeast that we're gonna get to here in just a moment is technically designed for up to 5 gallons of wine. Now I'm not too concerned because obviously this yeast is gonna have plenty of sugar to feast on with the particular batch that we're mixing up, but just to be safe, we're gonna take 9 teaspoons of yeast nutrient and add it into the must at this point. Last but not least is gonna be our yeast. Now we are gonna wanna start this in advance. I like the Red Star yeast. This is the Premier Cuvée. That is our favorite yeast from them. It has a very high alcohol tolerance, and this is a pretty spicy wine, so this one should work fine. Generally, I do like to mix a couple different types of yeast, but this is the only one we had left for this season, so we're gonna go with this one. The instructions on their packet are 95 to 100 degree water. Testing that there, I'm at right about 95 degrees actually. So all we do is just open up the yeast packet and pour it into the water. So I'll leave this just how it is. I'm not gonna stir it right away. If by the time it's ready to go in, it's not quite dissolved, I'll stir it slightly. But we need to give this at least 15 to 20 minutes to start kind of getting active, and then we will add it into the must as our last step. You can see it's fully dissolved here in the warm water. All I do is just pour it right across the top. And I wanna make sure I get all that yeast out of there, so I'm just gonna take and swig a little bit of the wine. To make sure I get everything out of the container. And then I am gonna go ahead and mix this in. Now, some people will say not to mix it in, just to leave it on top. I have not found that to be the case. At least I haven't had any issues with the multiple batches of wine that we've done. So I do mix that yeast in really well. Now for us here during the summertime in Arizona, typically it takes about 4 or 5 days for the primary fermentation to finish. It's Sunday today, so by about Thursday or Friday of this week, we'll be taking this, racking all of the material, so all of the berries and that type of thing out of this container, and we will essentially have our wine. Now, of course, it's still gonna sit and be re-racked a few times, but in the end, this will be mulberry wine. We're here in Arizona during the summertime. Here in the house, it's anywhere from 78 to 82 degrees, so we're very, very warm. It's our favorite time of year to do any type of fermentation, and that includes wine. The reason being is that yeast is very, very happy at that temperature. Now, obviously, there's several more steps between what you saw here today and finishing the wine. However, it doesn't change from one type of wine to the next. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and link our series here where we showed you how to make wine from beginning to end. So that will actually take you from the next step all the way through bottling for this particular wine. One thing I can tell you with the mulberry wine is when it comes to back sweetening, we are absolutely going to back sweeten this one just a bit, because I think there's just something right about a mulberry wine that has just a taste of sweetness to it, probably right after a little bit of dessert. So just want to thank you for joining us here today. Hey, if you haven't actually checked out our regular farming channel, that is Edge of Nowhere Farm. That's where Lori and I do all of our farming and produce, well, the fruit that you saw here today. Would love to see you there. Want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel. The focus of this channel is taking healthy things from the farm and the farming operation and turning them into healthy meals for us. And we would love to show you how to do that as well. If you know anybody that would like this type of content, it really helps us out here if you would share it. And lastly, our Amazon shop. A lot of the things that you saw here today to create this wine are located in our Amazon shop. I'll leave a link down below. If you start with that link, it doesn't matter what you buy, you help to support us here. So just want to thank you for joining me today and encourage you to be farm healthy. So that's like 3% with 4 cups. I need a lot more. I need a whole lot more sugar. Instructions on the packet are pretty straightforward. I have a 1/4 cup of water and my temperature on the water is not high enough, so I'm gonna have to redo this.